All right, good morning, guys. I want to start off with our lesson on chapter 27, irregular comparison of adjectives. Last week we looked at comparison of adjectives. We talked about forming the comparative and superlative form of adjectives. In the comparative, you added an IOR to your stem in the masculine feminine to form the comparative. For the neuter, you added an E. Superlative, you added an isamus aum, the masculine feminine neuter. You added that to your stem to form the superlative. Today we're looking at a few forms that are irregular in nature, and you have to learn. It's a pretty short lesson. Let me go ahead and share my screen with you guys, show you what this looks like. I believe that's it. There we go. I think that's it. All right, chapter 27, and it's about 2 o'clock in the morning, so hopefully I'm a little bit coherent. Hopefully I don't get too much off here, but this is in chapter 27. We're on page 218. If you want to have your book open, you can look through this. You can, if you want, you can stop the video, read the chapter. There's 2 pages basically, and then watch the video, or you can watch the video and then read. But let's look at it here. Irregular comparison of adjectives. All right, so some adjectives ending in lis have an irregular superlative form. All right, you normally would expect the isamus aum, but instead it's going to have a limus aum. So instead of isamus aum, you have limus aum. Let me show you what that looks like. We take the adjective, there it is, facilis, facile, masculine, feminine, it's facilis. In the neuter, it's facile. It means easy. In the comparative form, it's just like you learned last week. You take the stem, facil, F-A-C-I-L, and you add I-O-R for masculine, feminine, and an E for neuter. So you have facilior, facilius. And that is easier. However, for the superlative, instead of the isamus aum, this is where it's irregular, you add a limus to your stem, facil limus aum. That means easiest. All right. Now, there are 6 adjectives, there's only 6 of them, that end in lis and are irregular in the superlative form. And here's a list of them. Facilis, facile, meaning easy. Difficilis, difficile, meaning difficult. So you have easy and difficult. It's easy to remember. Then you have similis, simile, which means similar, and dissimilis, dissimile, which means dissimilar. So those two are, opposites of each other. And then you've got gracilis, gracile, which means slender and thin. And then you have humilis, which means low or humble. And so these are your 6 words that you'll need to memorize that are irregular in the superlative, and they will all add limus aum in the superlative. All other adjectives that end in lis will form the superlative in the regular fashion. So it's only these 6 that this rule applies to. Now there are some adjectives that don't end in lis, but they end in er. And they also will be a little bit different. Instead of the isamus aum in the superlative, you will have remus aum. Remus aum. And here's what that looks like. Let's take this first example. Let me give you 3 examples. The first one I'm going to give you is the word libera, liberum. Of course, that means free. And if you wanted to compare it, somebody is freer than somebody else, you would take that stem, L-I-B-E-R, and then you would add an I-O-R or an E in the neuter. So here's liberior, liberius. Now this is where the difference comes in. For the superlative, we're going to add remus to, now this is important, it's not to the stem, because if you'll remember, in some ER adjectives, the stem, for some of them, has the E, liber, but in some, in the genitive, it gets rid of the E. Remember, pulcher, pulcra, it gets rid of the E. So Here, we're not going to use the stem. We're using the masculine singular nominative as the stem for the superlative, and you add remus. So here's what that looks like. Liber, here's the masculine stem, nominative, liber, and you add remus a un. Now this is where it's going to be helpful to keep this in mind. Let's look at pulcher, pulcra, pulcrum. Notice there's an E in the masculine, but no E in the stem for feminine and neuter. Okay, so when you decline this out, it's actually the feminine singular where you use the stem, because everything else, when you decline it, doesn't have the E. So thus, when we do the comparative, you have pulcrior, you take the stem pulcr, there's no E from the feminine, and you add an IOR or an IUS for, so there's the stem right there. You're going to get it from there. And that's where you add the IOR or the IUS to form more beautiful, pulcrior, pulcrius. But that is not what you do in the superlative. Remember, you take the masculine form. So here in the superlative, you will have an E. It's P-U-L-C-E-R, pulcher, remus, pulcher, remus. So it's got the E, unlike the comparative. Let's look at one more example here. Remember this word here, acere, acris, acre, right? Again, notice the masculine has an E, but the feminine neuter does not. So in the comparative, you use the feminine form for the stem. So it's acrior, acrius. But in the superlative, you go back to the masculine. So it's going to be A-C-E-R, acer, remus, acer, remus, a-un. So that's how you form it. Again, no E in the comparative because you're using the feminine stem, but you do have the E in the superlative, and that's because you're using the masculine stem. Make sure you note those differences. And that's all because in the comparative, you use the feminine form, which has no E, right? No E in those forms there. All right. So that is the first part of the lesson, learning on page 218, these irregular adjectives that end in lis, there's 6 of them, and then all adjectives that end in er will add remus to the superlative. All right, so the next part of the lesson, page 219, there are some adjectives that are incredibly different in their comparative and superlative forms. They are completely different. And because of that, you just have to memorize the forms in the positive, comparative, and superlative. To give you an example, if we want to say small, smaller, smallest, that's positive, comparative, superlative, small, smaller, smallest. They all look the same. That's easy. You just add an ER or an EST to the end. But some of our words, even in English, they don't look anything alike. Let's say something is bad. Well, what do you say? You don't say badder. What do we say? We say worse. And then we say worst. And they don't look anything alike. So we just know that instinctively how to say that in English. It's because we learned the language. In Latin, there's a few words like that. There are 6 of them, I believe. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them. 7 of them that look completely different. You've got to memorize them. So here's what they look like here. Here's the first one, bonus aum. You learned that word already. Means good, but in the comparative, it's the word melior, melius, meaning better. And in superlative, it optimus. Of course, if you know Optimus Prime from the Transformers, then you know this word. But optimus, that's good, better, best. But you've got to memorize all 3 of these forms: bonus aum, melior, melius, optimus aum. All right, what do the other ones look like? Let's try this one here. Malus aum. I think I just skipped one. There we go. Magnus aum is great, but in the comparative, it's major, majus. Now, I want to remind you that oftentimes an I in Latin, especially if it's in the middle of 2 vowels, is actually a consonant. And think like a J sound, or we don't have a J sound in Latin, but it would transfer in English to a J. So it's actually the word major, right? Great, major, right? Major, right? Greater. And then maximus aum means greatest. So those 3 are the positive, comparative, and superlative forms for great. About Malu sa'um, meaning bad. Well, you've got peor, peoris, uh, peor, peus. Let me say that right, meaning worse. And then the superlative form is pessimu sa'um, meaning worst. Multu sa'um, meaning much. Now, interestingly enough, the comparative form, there is no masculine and feminine, but there is a neuter. And we'll look at that here in a minute. It's a special, very special case, and we'll look at this separately. But in the superlative, well, here, plus in the neuter, it means more. In the superlative, plurimus means most. Okay, most, much, more, most. All right, how about parus? We learned that adjective meaning small, minor, minus, meaning smaller. Okay, notice we didn't just add an IOR, IUS. It's actually just an OR and a US here, minor, minus, meaning smaller. And minimus, meaning smallest. And then we've got two more to go here. This one, there really is no positive form, but in the comparative, it means, it's the word prior, prius, and it means former. And the superlative, you have primus, meaning first, former and first. So you got to memorize that one, but there is no positive form. If you look in your book there on page 219, it does tell you that there is a prefix. Um, yeah, they mention it. Actually, not prefix. Well, it can be a prefix, but also be preposition. Pri and pro, and they are related to these words, but they're not technically the positive. They're not adjectives. They're just related to them, and they mean in front of or before. And then the last one here is superusa, meaning that above. The comparative form is superior, superius, meaning higher. And the superlative form is sumusa, meaning highest or furthest. And in this form, it actually has a secondary form, supremus, and it has just a little nuance different. It can mean highest and last. Highest and last. So you got to memorize that one. It has two different forms. So those are the 7 irregular words. These are very common. They're used all the time. So you really have to memorize this list of 7 adjectives and their comparative and superlative forms that are irregular. Now, I mentioned plus a minute ago. Let me go back to that word right there. The word plus, it's very irregular, and especially how you decline it. So we're going to actually look at that one by itself and show you how this works. By the way, that's the list of all 7 of those words together right there. All right, so plus in the comparative adjective plus is declined in an irregular fashion and must be memorized. All right, so first thing you need to know, it's going to use the stem plur from not plus, but plur in most of the forms, plus third declension I stem endings. So there is no masculine, feminine, singular. And the neuter, you have plus. And remember, because whatever the nominative is an accusative, so you have plus plus. But for the rest of the word, it's the stem is plur, plur, and then you have your third declension I stem endings, blank, is, and then notice here the dative, it doesn't have a dative form. I told you it's irregular. Whatever's in the nominative has to be the accusative, and then the ablative, you have again the stem plur plus the ablative ending e, plure. Feminine, plural rather, is a little bit more regular. You've got your masculine, feminine, stem plur with your masculine, feminine endings, I should say. Third declension I stem, blank, excuse me, it's late. Plural endings for masculine, feminine are s, eum, ibis, s, ibis, added to the stem plur. And then in neuter, you have your neuter endings, a, eum, ibis, ibis, plur. Now, you do need to note here, in the plural neuter, nominative accusative, it doesn't use the ia. You would expect it to have an ia here, but it doesn't. I'm sorry, I know it's pain in the rear end. It just doesn't have it, and it's a little bit funky. The truth is, I'm not going to ask you to decline this on a test. You're welcome. But you do need to be able to recognize these words when you see them, and that this is the declension of the comparative form of plus. Okay, I think that's all I have for you. Go ahead and rewatch this video at your leisure. Go ahead and work on vocabulary and get to your lesson. If you have any questions, give me an email or give me a shout out and let me know how I can help you. We'll talk to you later.